I'll double that, and thank you again for being here. I have to say, personally, I'm very excited about this conversation. In another life, I'm a classical violinist, and growing up in the world of classical music, composers are like these mythical things that are mostly in the grave, and it's very exciting to have a real living composer live and in person. And it really changes, at least for me, the way we approach the creative and artistic process. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But Tim is joined by Deborah Jenkins Teske, who is the artistic director of the Colorado Vocal Arts Ensemble, as well as the Colorado Springs Chorale, and teaches at Colorado College, and is an expert on choral work, but particularly new choral work, and bringing work to life. So this should be an interesting conversation. We'll have about 15 minutes at the end for your questions, so be thinking of those, and certainly feel free to chime in with those. I want to start off by asking maybe a basic question, but both of you specialize in choral works, and why voice? What is so interesting about the voice, and writing for the voice, and directing the voice?
Okay, I'll start. It's the most direct instrument, the most personal instrument. Singing is accessible to everyone, to all people, from small children to, until you're almost in the grave yourself. Speaking of being in the grave, it's a very human means of expression. And for me, I came to choral conducting through my own love of singing. I don't really get to sing anymore very much, but that was the impetus for me to know that I wanted to work with choirs. And I'm very fortunate that I am able to work with really 4 different choirs, and they're all sort of different animals in their own way too at Colorado College. And then the Colorado Springs Chorale, which is the large symphonic choir here in Colorado Springs, and then the Vocal Arts Ensemble, which is really my firstborn. I founded it in 1992, right out of graduate school, because the repertoire that CVAE focuses on is my passion. So that's sort of how, that was my path into it. And that's why singing, it's so intimate and personal.
Yeah, I've been singing all my life, and grew up singing, and then when I went to college, singing sort of was my primary instrument. I also studied piano, but it was always voice that was the most easy and most honest thing to do. And it's also sort of what got me into the professional sphere of being a musician as well. When I was in college, we started a men's a cappella group called Cantus, and after we were done being in school, we turned that group into our full-time profession. So that was my first job out of school, was to tour the country and sing concerts. And even though I studied composition as my major in college, that wasn't my first job. And so I was writing the whole time that I was touring and performing, in the hopes that one day when I was done singing as a full-time job, I'd be able to make a living by writing. And so I sang with Cantus all the way up through 2013, and I retired from the group and then transitioned into a career of writing full-time. And the contacts and the network that I had made from my years of touring around the country, and not only performing but also doing educational work for college ensembles and high school ensembles, meeting all those musicians and meeting the directors, I was able to build up a resume of work and have a good network of people who were looking to me to create music. And so it made sense that most of my work over the last 4 years has been writing vocal music.
How does your experience as a singer inform your style as a composer?
Well, I know what it feels like to sing and to perform. I know what it feels like to be lost in a score and to not know where you are, and to have to try to find your pitch from another voice part or whatever's leading up to it. So I'm very conscious of that. That wouldn't be style, I guess. That'd be more technique and just sort of trying to give the singers an easy way in as possible, not necessarily how it affects the actual writing, but just the nuts and bolts of actually having to rehearse it, because in Cantus we'd sit there with new scores all the time, and if we had to edit things based on what was on the page, if there was a phrase that went on for 4 pages, obviously we'd have to take a breath somewhere, so we'd have to talk about that. And so then the flip side is, as a composer, I'm thinking, okay, well, a singer's not going to be able to make that phrase. I either need to put a breath in there for them, or write stagger breathe, or assume that the conductor's going to make that choice for me. So a lot of it is the nuts and bolts of composing, that and having to do it so much and learn so much music informs how I write. But I also know the kind of music that I like. I know the kind of music that connects well with audiences, and that's what I try to do when I'm giving music to other people.
A music director, a conductor, has so much influence on how a work is performed, and how does your experience as a singer inform your work as a director, as a conductor?
I think if you haven't yourself sung, you would lack some empathy for the process of creating the music right out of your own body. Singers think in a very specific way. They approach things differently than instrumentalists do. You know, your violinist, David, you can put your fingers down on the string and more or less get the right note to come out. For singers, it's so aural, and there's so much imagery that singers rely on because they can't see their instrument. They can't take it out of the box and polish it up or tune it. It lives in them. So what they had for lunch affects how well they're going to sing on any given day. You have to have empathy for that when you work with them in groups. So it's very people-oriented work as a conductor.
Tim, how did the piece compare when you heard it for the first time on Friday? How did it compare to that blueprint that you had in your mind when you first sat down to write it?
It was great. I feel like the piece exists as a thought or as an idea for so long in my mind, and you're right, this was a shorter timeline for us, so a shorter time for this piece, but and then there's this, so for me there's this period of doubt that happens. I mean, there's many periods of doubt throughout the process, but there's one specific one where I've written it at the piano and I can hear the choir in my mind, and I know how it's going to work and how it's going to sound, and then I plug it into the computer. I think, okay, let's just hear. I'm just going to sit back and listen. I don't have to play it. I don't have to read the music. I can just listen. And the computer spits it back out, and I go, oh, is that anything? And it's this huge moment of doubt, because the computer doesn't care about the words, or it does dynamics, but it's nothing like what it is when the singers stand there and actually put humanity into it, and it comes out of their mouths. There's nothing like that. So for Friday was the moment for me where this thing came alive. And tonight will also be fantastic, but for me Friday is, I look forward to those moments so much because I just get to hear it.
And as an audience member, for me, experiencing new work for the first time, it's exciting, it's thrilling. And I'll finish with one question before we open it up for your questions. And that is, why does creating new work matter? Greenbox is a place to create new work. And for me as an artist, it's such a gift to turn off Highway 24, to turn out of the traffic on Highway 24, come into Green Mountain Falls and see new work and create new work. Why is it important for both of you to create new work, to perform new work, to share new work?
I think we're hardwired. Human beings are hardwired to create, and if what we spend our whole time doing is recreating, that's important too. Preserving, recreating. But if we're not part of the continued life of the art form, then there's it will die if it's not fed with new creative energy by those of us who are still alive on the planet. And that's not ever, there's not going to come a time where that's not true. And there's not going to be a community where that isn't true. Art doesn't have to just be made in New York City or Paris, or art gets made here in Green Mountain Falls.